Shalom. It's falling Yeshua. Welcome again to the Rock. There's a lot of messages out there. I was sent one by a couple of brothers, and it was of a woman, and she was claiming that those of us that are talking about food shortages are exaggerating. We're making these things up. And, it was a homesteading channel. And we're doing this for views. Well, first and foremost, if you have not been part of my channel for a long enough time, you'll know I don't do things for views. I don't sensationalize things. I don't say World War III's coming tomorrow. I don't do that. I do appreciate the AdSense, and it is very helpful. The views are very helpful, but I don't sensationalize. You also will notice that I don't ever say things like, share, subscribe, because if you like it, you're gonna like it. If you want to share it, you'll share it, and if you want to subscribe, you'll subscribe. So I don't do things for that reason. But just, to respond, for those of you that listen to these channels and say, these people, when they say there is no food shortage and things are making it up, well, let's have a question for you. If these people who are saying there's no food shortages are right, and those of us that are saying there are food shortages are wrong, what position does that put you in if you've stored up food? You got some extra food. If those of us that say that food shortages are happening are right, and they are wrong, then what? I also want to ask this question. California had a drought. And they're saying, and California produces, for those that don't know, look up how much fruit and vegetables and nuts that California produces. They had a drought. Farmers that I know who live in California talked about literally not being able to plant, in some cases, 60 to 70% of their crop. I know an onion farmer out there in California was not able to put down 60% of his crop. There are articles all over the news about oranges being affected, cherries being affected, almonds being affected, lettuce being affected, rice being affected. There's rice being affected in Arkansas, rice being affected in California. Those are two of the top producing states in this nation as far as rice is concerned. So we know that the cows have been cold, beef prices have dropped because people couldn't buy the hay for their cows. We know chickens, millions of them, cold, killed. That's eggs, and that's meat. Millions of them. So all these things happening, and they're saying that some sectors of agriculture were hit 10 and 20%. What do you call that? Well, my grocery store, you see the videos of people walking through grocery stores. Look, my shelves are still packed. And people forget what it was like, last year, dead smack in the middle of, the COVID, when the shelves were empty. Stores are still, people call it fronting, but they call it, I can't remember what they call it. There's a term that they use to when they bring and it's not fronting, but people call it fronting. But when they bring the stuff from the back of the shelf to the front of the shelf, you can go to stores right now and you're finding that there are limited supplies of certain things, especially in certain quantities. See, people will tell you things like, it's just a inflation situation, because the reason they say that is because that's comfortable for them. If you make $200,000 a year, $300,000 a year, and you say inflation, well, that's not going to make a big deal to you because you still can afford food. But if you say food shortage, and you realize shortages are different, that means there's going to be limited quantity. That means that there's going to be certain things where, and when you add inflation with shortages, now you're talking about something much bigger. You see, when there's shortages and there's inflation at the same time, now you're talking about the possibility of people doing things even crazier, even stupider, running in the stores, hurting people, to get food. It's a lot easier, it's a lot better to think, well, it's just going to be more expensive. It's a hell of a thing when you think about there's actually going to be a shortage. Well, I don't see it in my shelves. Well, of course you're not going to see it in your shelves because it just started. You're seeing, people don't understand, I guess, how the agricultural system works, nor do they understand how food storage works and things like that. It takes time for shelves to get empty. It takes time. Just like when people said that there's a diesel shortage, there are some people who thought that a diesel shortage is going to happen tomorrow. Like we only had 15% of our diesel, and we only had 20 days of diesel, before we all run out. And people didn't understand what that actually meant. People don't understand shortages. Maybe it's because of sheer ignorance or whatever it may be. Either way, you don't want to be the person that listens to these people that run around saying this stuff, and you don't have the food that you need. Yes, inflation is eating into people's pocketbooks, and it's going to continue to. But when you combine that with the idea that farmers themselves, people that I know who farm, people that you know who farm, people who came all the way out here to get hay from Texas, people were driving all the way into the Ozarks to get hay from Texas, from Minnesota, for their animals. And you think that things are just normal? I hope they are. I hope that things are normal. I hope that, well, we already know that they're not normal. But it would be nice to think that nothing's going to be affected. Just be careful who you listen to, because the inflation-only people are saying these things because they have the money to be able to buy what they need. And a lot of times we as people, we say things kind of like sticking our head in the sand. We say things that make ourselves feel comfortable. If I got a ton of money, inflation doesn't affect me, I can feel more comfortable. But if there's food shortages, it's a whole different ballgame. If you combine food shortages with inflation, now this game is changing drastically. There are articles you can go and look at on the news from farmers talking. We witnessed potato prices rising, and now potato prices look like they're dropping a little bit more. But we witnessed potato prices rising. We understand shortages. Talk to a farmer. Talk to somebody who's growing, a large, I'm talking about people who may own 5, 6, 7, 800 acres of farmland. When they tell you that they've only been able to plant 20%, what does that sound like to you? Does that sound like plenty? It's just going to cost more? Or does it sound like we are headed to a time of shortages? And because, even reading the Bible, 7 years of plenty, 7 years of famine. As times of shortages get worse, they start off good and they progressively get worse. They don't start off on day one. We're not talking about we're going to wake up tomorrow and there's no food in the shelves. We already know that this system works in a way that things gradually happen. They gradually take rights. They gradually, the whole zombie plague COVID, they gradually took rights from people. Things are gradual in this system. Because if they did it all at once, if they alarmed people all at once, it would scare the shit out of people. And they don't want to scare the shit out of people. They just want to make sure that they're ready. They want to make sure that when you find out, it's too late to do anything about it. And when it's too late to do anything about it, then you're just going to go into your, that they have control, basically. I'm not telling you that there's food shortages because I'm just saying it because it's a fancy talking point. I say it because it's being experienced by people that I know. People that farm. Aside from the fact that it's on the news. Aside from the fact that you can't not produce 20, 30, 40, 50% of your food. You cannot produce or sow your fields and say that everything's going to be okay. Mathematically, it's impossible to say that there's not going to be a shortage of food. It may not be, end of the world, but to say there's not going to be a shortage is almost like you're playing stupid. Just being honest. Just being honest. Shortages aren't coming, they're here. 2023 will be worse than 2022. They're already talking about droughts in 2023. So don't let yourself get complacent thinking that everything is going to be okay. There is going to be inflation, and there is going to be shortages. And again, when I say shortages, don't think of Somalia. You got little Mboko with his stomach hanging out because he ain't got nothing to eat and there's flies landing on his face. I'm just talking about the things that are on the shelves that you are used to may not be there. You may not be able to get your 20-pound bag of rice. We could get to a point where they ration. We've seen grocery stores already do that. They're not rationing because of inflation. They're rationing because of scarcity. Bless y'all. Have a blessed day. Night. Shalom.